We are only a mere few days away from the NHL trade deadline, and we have a lot to discuss today. The rumor mill is running rampant, and we're looking at teams like the Montreal Canadiens, Toronto Maple Leafs, Dallas Stars, Ottawa Senators, Winnipeg Jets, Vancouver Canucks, and many, many more. We also have some news on the NHL waiver wire. We'll get into all the latest coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today is going to be a news-packed video, so you're going to want to watch all the way through. There's all kinds of great information here on things to be aware of as we approach the NHL trade deadline. You can kind of consider this like a trade deadline primer, if you will. So let's get right started and jump in here with a few quick news updates, including the waiver wire, which the Ottawa Senators have placed defenseman Cody Goloubef on waivers for purpose of being assigned to the minors. He's mostly been in the NHL pretty well all season, but has been a seventh defenseman for the Senators, really not playing a whole heck of a lot. Of course, he's a veteran guy. He's been around pro hockey for some time. He's played a bit before in the NHL with some other teams, played for a while in Europe. He was actually part of Canada's Olympic hockey team. Of course, the last Olympics didn't have NHL players, so he had an opportunity there, then presented himself an NHL opportunity afterwards. So he possibly could get claimed, and I wonder if the Senators might be making some other moves, and it's not a big surprise if they do, because they're not going to have a lot of other healthy defensemen, so I wonder what else might be going on to trigger that move. So I guess we'll see if anybody picks up him. And we also have goaltender Louis Domingue of New Jersey on waivers as well. Now, the Devils had put out a press release earlier indicating that Domingue was going to be held out for precautionary reasons, which I kind of thought might be a trade happening, but now he's on the waiver wire, so obviously that something must have taken place in regards to that. Maybe the trade wasn't going ahead. A team might want to see if they can grab him on waivers. We know there's teams out there looking for goaltending depth ahead of the playoffs, so I would not be shocked to see Domingue get claimed. Corey Schneider's been called up as well from the minors, so it should likely, Domingue, I would imagine, is either going to be claimed or traded by the sounds of things. So we'll keep an eye on that situation as well. And last night we did have a pretty nasty hit, in my opinion, from Jamie Benn on Oliver Ekman-Larsson in the Stars versus Coyotes game. Ben was thrown out, and there was a lot of talk and speculation if he might be getting a hearing and facing any supplemental discipline. But we did get confirmation that that will not be taking place. He was not going to be having a hearing, so the game misconduct and ejection that he was given last night by the NHL was deemed sufficient. Not real shocked, and part of me is kind of 50-50 on this one. I think it was a pretty malicious hit, something that he should have been able to avoid. But, he was given a game misconduct, which goes a long way to their decision. But I thought maybe he might get a game besides that. But apparently nothing further from player safety. And one other quick little minor trade as well. The New York Rangers acquired goaltender JF Berube from the Flyers in exchange for future consideration. So, of course, the Rangers already have 3 NHL goalies. I assume they only picked him up for the purpose of restocking their minor league team, since Shesterkin has been up with the Rangers and appears to be staying there. He's getting a lot of starts and played relatively well, so I don't think he's going back to the American Hockey League anytime soon. So I would imagine that's the only purpose there, because they clearly do not need another NHL goaltender, considering they're all healthy, the other 3. Now, jumping into the rumor mill, like I said, we have lots on the go here. Elliot Friedman's latest 31 Thoughts podcast came out earlier today, and there's all kinds of great information in that. Plus, there's some other articles going around with lots of other chatter here as well. So I want to kick things off with the Winnipeg Jets. Now, many have been questioning and wondering why the contract termination of Dustin Byfuglien has not been completed. He remains suspended without pay, and I do believe the understanding here is that the NHL has no problem with the Jets using the cap space associated with Byfuglien and other players to make acquisitions, even though that termination has not been completed. Apparently, they are still trying to exhaust every potential resource to possibly trade him. Now, I think the odds of him being traded are pretty slim. I'm not sure there's going to be a whole heck of a lot of interest out there. I mean, Big Buff had ankle surgery. He hasn't been on skates since the fall in September, before when he was testing it before training camp opened. And really, I can't imagine he'd be anywhere near the proper shape to be able to get into NHL hockey before the end of the regular season. But he would have to be on an active NHL roster prior to the deadline at 3 o'clock Eastern on the 24th to be eligible to play in the postseason. I can't see it happening, but you never know. I don't blame the Jets for trying. If they can get anything in return and get that off the books, and rather than terminate the contract, I think it would be better for all parties. The few insiders I've seen talking about it kind of wonders maybe if Florida would take a stab at it. Well, obviously, his old coach, Joe Quenneville, is there. Same with Dale Talon, a GM, quite familiar with Buff as well. And, of course, he's from Minnesota, and there's maybe some talk about there. But either way, he has a big cap hit. It would be tough to do. I know the Panthers want a blue liner, but I just don't see Buffalo being ready and able to take on, playing NHL games without a long rehab here. So I don't see it happening, but apparently that's why it hasn't happened. And I guess the Jets are also kind of waiting maybe until beyond the deadline to do the termination, because if he is signed by another team, he would not be eligible for the postseason. So any of the other teams who they think he might go to, especially in the Western Conference, teams that they might be competing with for playoff spots or run into in the playoffs, if he's not signed, then he can't play, and just kind of creates another option for the rivals to not have access to. Sticking in the Western Conference, let's jump over to the Vegas Golden Knights, who of course acquired defenseman Alec Martinez from the Los Angeles Kings, and there is some talk and speculation that they might not be done, and they might be adding an additional blue liner in the mix here in Vegas. It looks as though they do have interest in Chicago Blackhawks pending UFA defenseman Eric Gustafsson. Of course, he had a big year last year, putting up lots of points. He's now a pending UFA. His numbers are down this year, but he could still be a very serviceable depth piece for the Golden Knights. Now that they've acquired Alec Martinez, who can be more of the defensive specialist, they could use somebody else who could move the puck and be a little bit more of an offensive threat. And Gustafsson in the past has shown that he's capable of that. So the very well could be a good fit. I can't help but wonder as well if the Vegas Golden Knights might be a team who could possibly look at goaltending depth. I'm just not sure they have a ton of confidence in backup Malcolm Subban. I don't think they'd make any big trades or anything, but for example, with like a guy like Domingue being on waivers, I could see them maybe trying to squeeze in a third goalie like that who's on a cheaper contract that they might be able to make work. So Freeman had mentioned that as well on his podcast. No guarantees that they do anything, but just wondering if they have the confidence in Subban that they might not want some additional security there just in case as they head into the playoffs. Now, there's still talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins and the fact that general manager Jim Rutherford may not be done. The Jason Zucker trade so far is looking like it's going to work out relatively well. Zucker's been scoring at a good pace, fit in nicely, and many believe that they likely could be still adding some additional depth ahead of the deadline, likely on defense and possibly even another forward. Would not be shocking if they did. One name that was mentioned on the 31 Thoughts podcast by Elliot Friedman would be the possibility of bringing back Connor Sherry from the Buffalo Sabres. Obviously, it's a player that the Penguins are quite familiar with. He's had success there before. He also had his struggles, which is what led to his trade, but at the same time, it'd be easier for him to jump into the mix with a lot of familiarity, a lot of players he's spent a lot of time with in the past, same with them on the organization on the flip side. So clearly, it could be a piece that we look to there, and it's on defense. It wasn't really linked to any particular name, but many believe the Penguins likely will add a little bit of defensive insurance as they head into the playoffs. We've seen the Capitals add Brendan Dillon. The Penguins are likely going to run into the Capitals at some point early in the playoffs, whether it be first or second round, depending on how all the seedings end up finishing. And the Capitals have really bulked up there in that regard. They're a big physical team, and they could use somebody who could kind of fit that bill as well. So I guess we'll see what Rutherford continues to do to shape up his team for the playoffs. Now, of course, the Boston Bruins are still a team that gets a lot of attention, arguably the top team in the NHL and one of the top Stanley Cup contenders. Of course, they lost the Stanley Cup Finals in Game 7 last year, and I know they're anxious to get back and make another run at it here, but apparently, according to Elliot Friedman, Don Sweeney, the GM of the Bruins, is very reluctant to give up his 2020 first-round selection. They've traded a lot of first-rounders in the past, and those deals didn't always work out, and this might be a year that he's not so willing to do that, especially with a very deep 2020 NHL draft. But the main players that they are linked to, according to Friedman, they remain in high on Chris Kreider, one of the top teams vying for his services should the Rangers decide to pull the trigger on a trade. They're apparently also very interested in New Jersey Devils forward Kyle Palmieri. Now, they might be more willing to trade a first rounder for a guy with term like him. So it's certainly, another possibility. And he even mentioned Chicago Blackhawks forward Brandon Saad. If the Blackhawks made him available, that he might be a player that Boston would be very interested in. And he also mentioned Josh Anderson, but of course, Anderson in Columbus, his health has been a bit of a question mark, and many wonder if he'll even be moved at all. Very well could likely stay in Columbus due to question marks on his health in that regard. But the Bruins are expected to make a big acquisition. They very well could look to move some of their younger players. I would think Jack Staniku would be a player that they would not want to involve in that, but Friedman mentioned maybe like an Anders Bjork, maybe a Vakanainen, something to that effect. Wouldn't even completely rule out Trent Frederick as well. He certainly had his time up and down in the NHL at times, so we'll see what the Bruins do, but they probably would prefer to move a variety of prospects rather than give up that first round pick. But when it comes to Chris Kreider, if they decide that they really want him, I don't think that can be done without the first rounder being included. The Rangers have done a really good job of getting first rounders for other players in the past, and Kreider's as good or better than the other guys they've moved, so I really don't see them settling for anything less. It's going to definitely be a first rounder plus other options mixed in there as well in a package to obtain his services. Also want to take a look at the Dallas Stars. Now, Friedman goes on to mention that Dallas is likely looking to add some speed and some scoring and maybe some additional experience. And a couple of players that I thought were very interesting he brought up included a wily veteran, Joe Thornton from the San Jose Sharks. Of course, Joe Pavelski now plays in Dallas. That very well could play a role bringing Thornton. He does believe Dallas does have some interest. They have a very much a veteran team with Pavelski and Perry that were at it this past offseason. And Thornton might be interested in making a run at it here with another team. Of course, the Bruins could be in on Thornton as well. We've discussed that possibility before, but this is the first time I've kind of heard Dallas's name linked to a potential Joe Thornton trade. They also mentioned a strong possibility that they could be interested in Andreas Athanasiou in Detroit. Of course, the GM of the Stars, Jim Nill, worked for Detroit for a long time, certainly is familiar with some of the players that have been around there a little bit longer, and Athanasiou is one of the faster skaters in the NHL, so he certainly provides that speed. He certainly has the possibility to provide that scoring. He's a former 30-goal scorer, and he very well could be a good fit there. Only concerns would be is that he's a big personality, and they wonder if he could fit into the room without disrupting team chemistry or anything at this point in the season. That it might be more likely if Athanasiou is moved along that teams might be more willing to do that during the offseason, so they have a chance to start with him fresh at the beginning of the following NHL season. But I guess we'll see. Honestly, I think Dallas would be one of the few teams who could pull it off if they did acquire him. They've got a lot of good veterans there who could certainly work with him and kind of help him fit in. And at the same time, if there is any kind of immaturity issues or anything like that, that they could certainly, curb that and keep him in line. Kind of like what we saw with Evander Kane when he went to San Jose. The reputation wasn't the greatest. There was some concerns about him fitting in, but he went as a deadline deal, fit in nicely. The leadership group there certainly helped manage things well. And now part of that is in Dallas with Joe Pavelski. Thornton ends up there as well. I certainly would think that if they acquired Thornton and Athanasiou, that could be some big moves for the Dallas Stars, and I wouldn't be too concerned about the locker room really having any kind of impact from Athanasiou. Now, could the Toronto Maple Leafs actually trade defenseman Tyson Barrie? It's certainly a topic that has come up for discussion here in the last couple of days. We've seen the last couple of games with the Toronto Maple Leafs not having good performances and have slipped out of the playoff spot. I mean, ultimately, Sheldon Keefe and the Leafs have had a lot of good games, but they've had a lot of head scratchers as well, and many wonder if Barrie could actually turn into a trade chip. I mean, many think that the likelihood of Barrie sticking around beyond the current season is probably pretty slim. Based on what his contract needs are going to be, what kind of term and money he's looking for, it's doubtful that the Maple Leafs will be able to re-sign him. And it's fair to say I do think that this experiment of Tyson Barrie in Toronto just really hasn't worked out. It didn't work out under Mike Babcock. Of course, when Keefe first came in as the new head coach, things worked out well for Tyson Barrie. He got off to a good scoring streak there in the first few games, but since then, it's kind of tallied off, and it's fair to say that Barrie's just not in the right place, at least in my opinion. So could the Maple Leafs actually trade him? It's doubtful in a way, but at the same time, they could recoup some other assets that they've already given up. They've given up some more picks than they probably would have liked in other deals. The Andreas Johnsson injury might play a role here as well, because there's been a lot of talk about them trading one of their good, solid young forwards on a good contract like Johnsson or Kapanen or Kerfoot. But with all these injuries, they don't have as much there to trade as they used to. Maybe could they possibly trade Barrie for another defenseman? It's hard to say what the odds are, but it's just surprising at this point in the year with everything going on in Toronto to actually hear Tyson Barrie's name in the rumor mill. Personally, I think the odds of it happening are pretty slim. One team that Elliot Friedman wondered if they would inquire would be the Vancouver Canucks. It might be tough for them to make things work with the cap, depending on what other moves they make. But certainly Vancouver thought they were trading for Tyson Barrie back at the draft before the Leafs were able to acquire him, and that didn't end up happening. So the Canucks were certainly very, very interested, and the Canucks might be a place who are willing to possibly extend him. I know they have some cap issues now. They do have some uncertainty in a few players, and the fact that they're going to have to pay Pettersson and Hughes big deals in the next year or two complicates things matters a little bit more as well. But could we see Barrie get traded? Maybe, but I do think the odds are slim, and it's very surprising to hear his name in the rumor mill this late into the year. Now, there's still lots of chatter from various NHL insiders, including Friedman and Pierre LeBrun, saying that the Canucks are also very interested in Wayne Simmonds in New Jersey. That deal seems a little bit more likely, like something we could see, and it's been mentioned since they've given up a few picks already that they very well could include prospect defenseman Ole Ulevi, who certainly at this point is really, it's not fair to say he's a bust, but he's heading down that category of time right now. He has not worked out to be an NHL player. He has battled some injuries. I know he's had some decent showings at the American Hockey League. I'm sure there's a fair bit of Canuck fans that would not want to see that happen and probably still have high hopes for the young defenseman, but he came into he was drafted with a lot of fanfare, a lot of promise, a lot of potential, and it's just, time's ticking away here, and he's yet to fulfill any of that. So I guess we will see what the Canucks actually end up doing. If they do acquire Wayne Simmonds, certainly they'd have to give up something for a future asset to New Jersey to do that. To me, that would be the type of player that they would likely want, but after trading Tyler Madden, it's difficult to say. But they already don't have their first and second round pick this year. New Jersey's probably not going to want a draft pick too late into the future year, so hard to say if they can make it work or not. They might have to give up a guy like Ulevi to have any shot at making the acquisition. Lastly here, I want to touch on the Montreal Canadiens and the Colorado Avalanche. This little saga continues with these two teams scouting each other. Marc Bergevin and Scott Mellanby were spotted at a second consecutive game with the Colorado Avalanche. General manager of the Avs, Joe Sakic, was interviewed by local media and was asked about Bergevin's presence at the past couple of games. He kind of smugly, with a smile on his face, said Bergevin's daughter goes to Colorado University, and he's likely out there watching family. He's a big hockey fan, so he's probably just coming to watch the games because he enjoys hockey, and he seemed kind of smug and smirk as he said it. So clearly, I think there's more to it, because he's not going to get into any detail. I wouldn't expect Joe to come out and be like, yeah, we're having a big trade talk about these players here and whatever. It's not going to happen. But clearly, something is more to it. If he was going out strictly for family purposes, I can't imagine he would bring Scott Mellanby with him. And secondly, it's an odd time to be making family visits so close to the NHL trade deadline. There's been a lot of pieces on the Habs that the Habs apparently have shown interest in. It's really difficult to say, narrow down exactly what they're doing. At some points, we've heard Max Domi, we've heard Ilya Kovalchuk, we've heard they have interest in Jeff Petrie. The latest one, who's not the first time it's come up, is Thomas Tatar. I've seen Adrian Dater of Colorado Hockey Now indicate that the Habs really like Ryan Graves, so that they might be looking for him to be included in any kind of package. We even heard the big potential trade involving Carey Price, which I really don't see happening. That would be like a complete shocker if it did. Price to Colorado, I just don't see it happening. Like I said, I've mentioned that before. I really think of the old connection of Patrick Waugh going to Colorado is the only reason people really talk about that. But the Avs do need goaltending. Sakic even said in an interview that they would look to add depth goaltending to give them some extra insurance, but certainly Carey Price is not a depth goaltender, so that would not be what they're looking for in that case. I can see them going after a guy like Louis Domingue on waivers, maybe Aaron Dell in San Jose, maybe even a guy like Craig Anderson, for example, but the cap hit might be a problem with that way. They might not want to take that on, but of course Anderson played with the Avs before, so certainly some familiarity with the goaltender there, although that was a long time ago. It's clearly difficult to say what this connection is, but the latest information from Elliot Friedman and some other NHL insiders like Pierre LeBrun basically indicates they feel the Avalanche are looking at some of the forwards with the Montreal Canadiens, including Kovalchuk, including Thomas Tatar, and they keep mentioning the fact that the Habs don't necessarily want to trade a guy like Tatar, but after seeing the return on a player like Blake Coleman, that they feel like they have no choice but to listen, and if the return package is good enough, then they might not have any choice but to sell high while the player has higher value. So I guess we will see what happens, but it would not be shocking to see the Avalanche and the Habs hook up on a trade after the lurking presence of the Habs GM and assistant GM in Colorado over the last few days. So I guess we'll have to remain to be seen what could take place between those two clubs. Of course, as always, want to know your thoughts and opinions on all these potential trades, all these rumors that are being discussed ahead of the NHL trade deadline. Let me know your predictions on what trades you think we'll see before the deadline down in the comments, and we can discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.